Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to spend some of your Monday afternoon with us. My name's Bryn Durgan, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And I know a lot of you are very familiar, but if it happens to be your first time in the loft, then welcome. And if you've come to any of our author talks or book clubs or workshops, then we also want to thank you because, if it weren't for your support, then we wouldn't be able to be doing what we're doing. So now, let me introduce you to the woman of the hour, the person we've come together to celebrate. An award-winning newspaper journalist for the last 45 years, she is an opinion columnist and the dance critic for the Sarasota Herald Tribune. She is also the creator, writer, and host of the Facing Mental Illness newsletter and podcast. A graduate of the Columbia University School of Journalism, she previously worked for the New York Times, Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, Albuquerque Journal, and Albuquerque Tribune. Her collection of essays was released today by Ibis Books. It's right downstairs. And Jason Cannon is with us today as well, over there in the corner, who will be asking Carrie some questions shortly. So, A Place at the Table, Carrie's book. She draws on her memories of growing, cooking, foraging for, eating, and talking about food with family, friends, and strangers, and explores the intersection between what sustains us physically and how it binds us emotionally. So, of course, as I said, we are talking about the brilliant Carrie Seidman, so we can give her a round of applause. And then I also want to start by pointing out that in Carrie's book, you'll notice that each chapter is accompanied by a chapter head illustration that was created by her sister. So I will also give an introduction with some background. So Tracy Seidman was an award-winning artist and illustrator, as well as the longtime manager of a working cattle ranch for 50 years. She is renowned for her pine needle baskets embellished with beadwork, flint, and porcupine quills, created in the authentic Native American tradition, as well as for uniquely creative maps of southwestern ranches. She spent most of her life on the Wagon Mound Ranch in remote northeastern New Mexico, outside the small village of Wagon Mound. It is there she was buried after succumbing to an inoperable brain cancer in August of this year, just before this book was completed. So these illustrations are among some of the last works of art that she created, and we're so happy to have her memorialized through Carrie's book. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie, who will chat with us a little bit more.
Thank you, Bryn, for that lovely introduction. I am going to rewrite it for next time to leave out that 45 years part. I cringe every time I think about that. Thank you all for being here. I see so many friends and familiar faces here, and just so grateful to you all for how supportive you've been of all of my writing. I have to give a special shout out to the table in the back right there. That's my book club, the Lido Roddy, because we all live on Lido. I can't thank you all enough for being here. I just want to start by telling you a little bit about how this book came to be. It's been a long time in the making. It actually began as a column that I wrote for the Albuquerque Tribune in the early 2000s, and the column was called A Place at the Table. And it started because I was the restaurant critic of the paper at that time, and they decided they wanted to have a food column. Of course, food columns in those days were more kind of Betty Crocker, here's a recipe, very focused on, actual recipes and how to make food and that kind of thing. And I had kind of a different thought about what I wanted this food column to be. And I said, well, how about something that's a little more literary, So it will be about food in some tangential way, but about the memories we make around food and meals and sharing food with family and friends and cooking, and they sort of went, oh, well, that's not exactly what we had in mind. But somehow I convinced them to go for it, and I did write the column for several years. It was pretty successful. That newspaper was owned by the Scripps Howard chain, so they eventually put it out on the Scripps Howard Newswire, and I continued until, unfortunately, the Albuquerque Tribune met its demise in 2008 and was one of the thousands of newspapers around the country that are no longer. So I had this collection of essays that I'd written over the years, and then since then, and since moving to Sarasota, occasionally, those of you who know my column in the Herald Tribune know that occasionally I kind of go off off on a tangent and write about something like people stealing mangoes off my tree, or going shrimping in Sarasota Bay. So over the years, I've added more essays that are food related in some way, and that's how this collection came about. So some of these are from you know, quite a number of years ago. Some of them are more recent. I have so many people to thank because these have been collected over so many years, but I want to mention a woman named Barbara Page, who was my copy editor at the Albuquerque Tribune. Barbara's no longer with us, but she was, and I don't even know if anyone knows what a copy editor is because they don't really exist anymore. But these were the people who saved your butt when you made mistakes in your copy and wrote, in Barbara's case, brilliant headlines, funny, you know, wonderful, clever headlines. And she was the first fan and biggest promoter of A Place at the Table. So every time I talk about the book, I like to acknowledge her contribution because she was so supportive. Of course, the other person that I need to acknowledge is my sister Tracy, and I'm going to try really hard to get through this without totally falling apart. Tracy and I had talked about doing a book for a long time, and we originally talked about doing a children's book together because she was an illustrator, as well as an amazing artist in many other mediums. And I did write a children's book called Busy Lizzie that never was about a child with ADHD. But that never came to pass. But when I decided to try to gather these essays and put them into a collection, I thought, wouldn't it be lovely if she did little chapter head drawings for each chapter? And so I asked her to do that. We talked about it over some time, and then it just kind of, you know, didn't go anywhere. And I ended up sending her the manuscript when I'd finished it last year, and just made some suggestions about, you know, what she might focus on for her illustrations. And you know, we had some challenging times in our relationship due to some family situations, and I didn't ever hear anything, so I wasn't sure that she was going to do the illustrations. And just before I came home from Montana this past summer, where I was finishing the editing on the book, a package arrived for me in the mail, and it was these wonderful illustrations, which I think are every bit as good or better than the content that goes with them. And so if you do choose to buy the book, I hope you'll appreciate her wonderful artwork. And as Bryn noted, she died in August, so still working on recovering from that. And I had imagined that she would be here with me for this event. So I love you, Tracy, and I'm sorry you can't be here with me.
She is here with me.
Okay, now I'm gonna pull myself together. So I thought I would just read a chapter from the book to give you some idea of what this is about. You know, so many people have been so supportive and said, "Oh my God, this is so wonderful, your first book." And it's actually not my first book because I wrote a mental health book, but you know, this is such an accomplishment. And I found myself saying, no, really, it's not that big a deal. It's a collection of essays. It's not like, it's like something you can pick up and put down. So I didn't want to give it too magnified a status. It's a lot like my column, I think. Those of you who know my column will feel like you're with a familiar friend when you read these essays. So I thought I would read one.
Do you want to use the stand, Gary?
Oh, do I have to stand up?
No, do you want to use the mic stand?
Oh. Yeah, that would be good. Obviously, I don't do this very often. Okay. I'm always worried that you can't hear me though. I'm someone who has hearing issues myself, so it always makes me crazy when I go to something and I can't hear what's being said. Do I need to hold it closer to my mouth? Okay. So this chapter is called Pork on the Hoof. And I wish you could see this little illustration of this little piglet coming out of a box that my sister, well, you'll see it. Her name was Louisa, and she was a pig, literally. The baby pink porker arrived in a box equipped with breathing holes under the tree one Christmas morning when I was in junior high. The bouncing gift had a bright red bow and a tag that identified it as a present from my older sister to my father. Now, my father was a man who liked big dogs, polo ponies, and Angus cattle on a plate, very rare. He had never expressed the least bit of interest in pigs, and in fact, wasn't even that fond of pork. He preferred to gnaw on Flintstonian-sized steak bones and had a capped front tooth to prove it. But my sister, who'd moved away from home and was living in rural splendor in Connecticut, was insistent. In the middle of what she describes as her Earth Mother phase, she'd been appalled on a recent visit to see the amount of wasted food that went down the disposal at her family home. To her, the solution was simple: get a pig. After all, that's what she had done. Her own pet, lovingly named Bacon, gobbled the remnants of her gourmet cooking with relish. Simple, no waste, feed the critters, and when the time comes, disappear the porcine presents to some pork-loving household. But back to Louisa. We kids came up with the name. My father went by L. William, or Bill, shunning the first name he had long abhorred. So naturally, we found the feminized version the perfect choice for our new family member's moniker. Louisa took up residence in the old dog pen next to the garage and happily scarfed up the apple cores, cheese rinds, and unpopular cereals that the 4 children still at home rejected. Before we entered the house, a visit to her odoriferous pen was essential. Louisa was always happy to see us, particularly if we needed to destroy evidence of not having eaten our lunch that day. We came to love her slobbery, hairy face, even after she became too big to qualify as adorable anymore. Even my father was eventually won over. An early devotee of jogging, Dad would rise before the rest of the world was awake and run the mile to the end of our driveway to retrieve the daily newspaper. Soon after Louisa's arrival, we began to hear curious rumors. Did the Siegmunds have a new dog? One uncharacteristically petite? And was that what they'd seen trotting along behind Bill the other morning? What kind of breed is it that looks so much like a pig, a neighbor wondered. And wasn't it quite amazing how those little legs could keep up? The jogging couldn't counteract the table scraps, however. Eventually, Louisa got too big for the dog pen. My dad's work took him more frequently out of town, and his fitness routine gave way to new challenges. Another one of the kids graduated and moved away, and the remaining one's interests moved on to the next animal acquisition or boyfriend. The need for a breathing disposal waned. Then one day, Louisa disappeared. In my family's time-honored tradition of pretending that uncomfortable occurrences had not, in fact, actually occurred, no one explained where our neglected pet had gone. But it didn't take a genius to figure out why the big freezer was suddenly so full of butcher-wrapped packages that bore labels like chops and hock. Now, we were country kids. We'd seen our Shetland pony killed by lightning. We'd eaten steaks from the cattle on our farm down the road. But we also had our limits. "You killed Louisa," we cried. "You killed our pet." No way were we going to sanction the murder by cannibalizing her. This had nothing to do with the religious dietary restrictions. Despite a Russian Jewish heritage, my father had rarely seen the inside of a synagogue, and his children never had. And so the neatly wrapped packages remained, shoved to the side with a pang of regret whenever we were asked to retrieve something else from the freezer in the basement. One day, my mother's mother, a woman from staunch puritanical New England stock, who'd endured lean times during the Depression and believed waste was sinful, got wind of our rejection. "Why, that's absurd," she said. "I can't believe you would let a freezer full of meat go to waste." So eventually Grandma Barry ended up with a lifetime supply of pork. And the rest of us ended up with our memories of Louisa, the pig who arrived in a gift box, went out in a freezer, and did some mean jogging in between. We can do one more, or do you want to, I don't know, what's our timeline?
Yeah,
Want to do one more?
One more, Carrie.
Okay. All right, this one's called Strawberries. When I walked into the produce store the other day, I noticed there were flats of strawberries on sale. It's that time of year when they are plump and plentiful and relatively cheap. They start you thinking about things like strawberry shortcake and strawberry jam and strawberry rhubarb pudding with whipped cream and Grandma Seidman. Wait a minute, where did that come from? She's been gone for more than 50 years now, my father's eccentric and not infrequently exasperating mother. And you'd be more likely to remember her for her valiant crusade to save the African Maasai tribe or joining heart and cause with the hippies over the Vietnam War than for anything to do with strawberries. After all, this was a woman who never got closer to a kitchen than to commend the chef for most of her 70-odd years. She dutifully took each of her 10 grandchildren out to dunch, her preferred mid-afternoon meal, at her favorite restaurant when they came home from college. But you knew better than to ask her to put on an apron and whip you up a little something to eat. To her, an apron was the wide part of the driveway where you parked the car. This lack of domesticity was a distinct bonus when we were young and regularly spending Sunday afternoons at her big Tudor-style home overlooking a small lake in western Michigan, where an entire spacious playroom was devoted to holding every toy, book, and record a child could ever desire. But that's another story. When you had a grandma who didn't know how to boil an egg and Sunday was the cook's day off, the meal was whatever came in the delivery truck from the specialty store and required no more preparation than twisting off a top or slicing through plastic. Artichoke hearts, Greek olives, shiny crackers in exotic shapes and colors from the Far East, hearts of palm, smoked oysters, tiny cocktail franks to be skewered with toothpicks sporting frilly skirts, kumquats. Well, okay, those weren't so enticing. I was introduced to them all sitting at a table in the playroom's kid-sized kitchen. Some people lovingly remember their grandmother for her sweaty brow over a hot stove, her scent of cinnamon and brown sugar, or her light as air matzo balls. I remember mine for her fervent discussions about the ills of browlessness, The relish trays she brought to Thanksgiving dinners that were a point of pride because she'd lined up all the purchased canned goods so attractively, and her devotion to a husband who lay dying in an upstairs bedroom for nearly a decade. I have an enormous collection of family recipes, but none of them came from her. So why the strawberry connection? Well, in her waning years, long after her husband had died, her grandchildren had spread across the country, and the playroom goods had been donated to a local museum. Grandma Seidman developed a much postponed and entirely unexpected domestic interest. I think of her now as the belated cook. At the ripe old age of 75, Grandma discovered the kitchen. She let the cook go, purchased a number of time-saving gadgets, the kinds advertised on late-night television, consulted a big fat recipe book, and pretended that heating something up and creating a dish were one and the same. Now Dunch took place at her home and was likely to consist of any number of strange concoctions broiled on top of an English muffin in a toaster oven. But in one final and grand hurrah, she created her magnum opus, a recipe for strawberry pie. This was a fairly mundane but well-received recipe that she never failed to mention had a secret ingredient. As her sole epiphany of culinary creativity, she was loath to reveal just what that secret was, though because she would appreciate a brief moment of immortality in the kitchen, I will. A thin layer of softened cream cheese spread on the cooked crust just before the strawberry layer. Nor did she admit that the crust was store-bought and the whipped cream came from an aerosol can. We played along and feigned ignorance, oohing and yumming over the novelty and politely neglecting to mention how much we missed the relish trays of exotic delicacies and the do-it-yourself dinners on a toothpick. But now that she is gone, a flat of red berries at the store makes me miss the belated cook more than ever. You have your own mic.
I have my own mic. Is it on?
It doesn't sound.
No?
And
Oh,
in
no,
case
it's
you
on.
missed who this is Jason Cannon of Ibis Books, who was brave enough and kind enough to accept my book for publication.
I felt blessed to receive this. You mentioned mangoes earlier, and when Carrie first approached me, that was the article that immediately jumped to mind, was her essay on the mango thieves of her house. When my girlfriend and I walk our dogs through our neighborhood, there is actually a tree full of mangoes, and there are signs, just like what you say, but the sign there says, "You are on camera."
Yeah, that's what one of mine said before it was stolen.
Oh my goodness. So yes, my name is Jason, and I run Ibis Books, and so happy to be putting Carrie's book out into the world. Many of you got copies when you got your ticket to this event, and Bryn and her team have copies down at the counter if you want to get them there. And I have given Carrie the best autographing pen in the world, so come up and grab her before you go, and she'll happily scribble on your book. I just want to ask Carrie a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you as well if you have questions or things you want to ask her about her book. My big question, Carrie, is because in the book, each essay is also accompanied by a recipe from the trove she mentioned. So that strawberry pie recipe is in the book along with the essay and the illustrations. In terms of, because I'm a writer myself too, I'm curious about your process with these essays. Did a recipe inspire you? Was it like that moment where you walk in and saw the strawberries? Were they inspired by different events? Or as you approached each essay, what was the inspiration?
The recipes were not the inspiration. The recipes were actually an afterthought. In the original column that I wrote for the Albuquerque Tribune, I told you I didn't want to do a traditional cooking column, so there were no recipes. But one thing that I inherited when my mom died in 2009 was her recipe box. which was just stuffed with all these little cards in her perfect penmanship with blobs of food on them and things like that. And when I started envisioning, so the essays absolutely came first, and the idea for the essays came from all over the place. And if you end up reading the book, you'll see that they're from different periods of my life. And there's a chapter on eating out alone, which I had to do a lot of when I was a sports writer traveling on the road with a basketball team of men that I didn't go out to dinner with. And there are, there's an essay about cookbooks, and it was kind of just like anything that had, that tangential tie to food or a meal or that kind of fellowship around food. So the essays definitely came first. Obviously, the illustrations came a little bit because they were not part of the original column either, but there's so much about family in this book that I thought, having Tracy do the illustrations was just another way to bring together that theme of food and family. And then I thought, but I have my mom's recipes. So part of what I did this summer when the actual manuscript of the book was done was sift through my mom's recipe files and find the recipes that best matched the essays. Some of them actually they're mentioned, like the strawberry pie are mentioned in the essay, and some of them are just, for example, the Louisa. There is not a Louisa recipe. That would be a little morbid, but there was a pork recipe. So the recipes were actually an afterthought.
You mentioned being in Montana this past summer, and so this question again is just kind of a process question. What is your writing process? Hemingway was famous for writing every day, 6 a.m. to noon. And other writers, Stephen King, 2,000 words a day without fail. Do you have kind of a Carrie Seidman process of writing?
Well, I've not often had the time like I had this summer in Montana where, my time was really completely my own. I have always been someone who writes best first thing in the morning. I've always said if you haven't got my story by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, forget it. You may as well wait for the next day. So my process actually is generally to get up at the crack of dawn and either start writing then or go out for a walk and then come back and start writing immediately. And I don't have necessarily a set amount of time. My writing process, and this is true when I'm writing my column too, is that I kind of just regurgitate the whole thing, and then I spend 90% of my time cleaning it up. I didn't do that when I was younger. When I was younger, I just regurgitated, and then I would get very irritated when my editors wanted to, cut it down and reorganize it. But thankfully, after a very long career, I've learned that simple is best, and simple and clean and clear. And so the editing now is really, for me, a fun part of the writing process.
Can I borrow your copy right there really quick? Carrie, could you talk to us a little bit about the cover? The cover, because I think this is just so cool too, but you've all seen it now, but there's a little bit of description inside, but if you could talk about the cover, that would be great.
Sure. So my grandma Barry, who was the one who ended up with all the pork from Larissa, she was having her 90th birthday, and all of the girls in the Seidman family, not just in my immediately family, but in the Barry side of the family, we decided we would collaborate on creating a quilt for her birthday. And everybody was responsible for making 2 squares One of them was just a pieced square that had, abstract design, and the other one was supposed to be an applique, of some kind of a scene or memory or something like that. So this picture that's on the front of the book is a picture of the square that Tracy made for the quilt, and it shows our family dinner table. What you see in the forefront is the back of my father's bald head. And then you see, I could identify everyone who's at the table. What you can't really see, which I'm sorry about, because of the way it reproduced, is Tracy had a wonderful sense of humor, sort of sometimes dark, but in the original quilt square, one of the children who's sitting at the table has this little crystal bead that looks like a tear coming out of her eye, because our family dinners inevitably ended up with somebody crying and leaving the table. So this is, probably doesn't have the impact for everyone else that it has for me, but that's where it came from. And I have the quilt, and it's on my bed.
Great. We have some time here. Want to make sure we have time for you to come up individually as well and get your book signed. But does anyone have a question for Carrie? Yeah, right here.
I was wondering when you wrote the Mango essay, because I remember that. I think that may be the first essay of yours that I ever read.
The question was about when was the Mango essay written?
I'd have to go back and look, but it was probably, let's see. Well, I started writing the column in 2017, and it was probably pretty close to then. I had sort of been fighting the mango thieves for a long time before that, and I had an incident, which you can read about in the essay, where I just kind of lost it with some people who were trying to steal my mangoes, and that precipitated the mango essay.
Yeah, right here.
Well, I just want to thank you for all the Sarasota ballet reviews you do, because it triples my appreciation of the ballet. You're just brilliant. And then the other thing, you write about your family, and one time you wrote about how your parents were the glue that kept the family together. That really was very healing when I read that, and I just appreciate your writing a lot. And I'm glad you're in Sarasota.
Thank you so much. Thank you. My goodness. Yeah. In case you didn't get that already, my family's pretty important to me.
I think I saw a hand pop in here.
Yes, I'm not going to take full credit for the mango thief story, but I might share some credit with mine. Somebody only took them off the ground.
This is Lucia. She was one of my neighbors out on Lido, and she loves mangoes perhaps even more than I do.
Have you always been, I became friends with you later, have you always been a natural storyteller?
No. I don't think so. Those of you who know my history know that I never intended to be a writer at all. I grew up thinking I was going to be a ballet dancer, and ended up in journalism school without really any aspirations to become a journalist. I could write. I was always a very avid reader, but I never thought about writing, or definitely not working for newspapers, and I just kind of fell into that. And to be honest, I don't think I could have written something like this. I don't think I could write the column that I write now without having done a lot of years writing other stuff and learning, how to craft a story and how to build suspense and how to be clever. And, I think I'm a trained writer. I don't think I'm a natural writer.
There's a hand right over here.
One question. How does a wonderful, warm, big heart like yours fit in such a slender body?
Well, you can read the chapter that's called The Skinny Critic. It was about when I was a restaurant reviewer, and everybody kept saying, "Oh, you can't be a restaurant reviewer. You're too skinny." So,
Yeah, right there in the back, yeah.
Carrie, do you like to cook? And what kinds of things do you like to cook? And as a fellow writer who finds it difficult to tear myself away from the computer to start cooking, how do you manage that time management?
this is my friend Marina Hars, who's an amazing dance critic we were here a couple weeks ago celebrating her new book, which is on the choreographer Alexei Ratmansky. And if you are a ballet fan, absolutely get the book. It's amazing. Cooking. I love to cook. I am sort of incapable of cooking in small amounts. I guess that's because I probably grew up with, in a family of 6 kids. But somehow, even when I'm making dinner for me and my son, it like magnifies. I don't cook as much now as I did, of course, when my son was living at home. And I don't even entertain as much as I used to. But I've always liked cooking things that are challenging. One of the things that I'm fairly good at and that I really enjoyed is making like fancy desserts, even though I don't particularly like eating them because I don't really have a sweet tooth. But I actually toyed with the idea of going to pastry chef school for once. So I like making things that look pretty. The presentation is very important to me. But I still enjoy cooking. I just don't do as much of it as I used to.
Any other questions?
Well, I hope
Yeah.
you'll do an audiobook of your memoirs, because you're very good at reading them.
Oh my God, I hate my voice. I can't stand, well, I don't think everybody, when you hear the sound of your voice on recorded, it's like, is that what I really sound like? But thank you.
Anyone else? If not, that's okay, because what we'll do is we'll release, and you can come grab Carrie one-on-one, get a copy of the book. Also, if you want to sign up either for the Bookstore One newsletter and or the Ibis Books newsletter, there's also some bookmarks up here if you like. But come say hi, grab a copy. Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Congrats, Carrie.